Okay, I think that's 1 minute past 12, so I think we'll make a start. I'll just share my slides. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Elaine Gemmell, and I'm Head of Regulatory Affairs at InnoScot Health. Today, we're going to be joined with Damon and Umar from BSI, and they're going to talk to us about the new statutory instrument for post-market surveillance. So I hope this is going to be an interesting session for you today. Please feel free to ask questions by putting them in the chat, and we'll try and answer them as we go through. There will be time at the end if you want to ask questions in person. So if you want to store your questions up and ask them at the end, that will be great. So the topic first seminar today is the new post-market surveillance legislation for medical devices and what you need to know. I actually feel as if I've been talking about the new regulatory framework for medical devices in the UK for years. And when I actually sat down and thought about it, it feels like that because I have been talking about it for years. But we're just starting to see the first pieces of legislation come through. So this is quite an exciting time in the UK regulatory environment. So I'll just talk briefly about post-market surveillance as it is or was before the new statutory instrument was introduced. Post-market surveillance is essential as a means to ensure that devices that put onto the market continue to be safe, effective, and have an appropriate level of quality. When you put things into users' hands, you never know what's going to happen with them. You never know what's going to happen in different environments or what will happen over the lifetime of the product. So it's really important to continue to monitor and have a systematic way to analyse the results that you get back from the market. So our current medical device directive was first published in 1993. So you can imagine that the technology that was around in 1993 is absolutely nothing compared to what we have today. The Medical Device Directive has evolved and has tried to keep up, but it's clear now that we now need to put more robust legislation in place that reflects the world today. With respect to post-market surveillance, the term appears twice in the Medical Device Directive. Annex 10, which is concerned with clinical evaluation, states that clinical evaluation and its documentation must be actively updated with data obtained from the post-market surveillance. It also states that post-market surveillance must include post-market clinical follow-up. Those are the two references within the directive. However, the directive does not define what is meant by post-market surveillance in any way, shape or form. And the closest we get to this definition is a requirement under the section for quality management systems that say that the quality management system must include an undertaking by the manufacturer to institute and keep up to date a systematic procedure to review experience gained from devices in the post-production phase and to implement appropriate means to apply any necessary corrective action. So as with many things in Medical Device Directive, a lot of the information on how you do this is put into guidance. And I guess there's two sides to every coin. Frustratingly, there's not a prescriptive way to do it. But on the other side, it leaves manufacturers the flexibility to do this in many different ways. However, this new statutory instrument for post-market surveillance that was just introduced on the 16th of June is seen as an urgent measure to address the deficiencies in the current medical device legislation without waiting for full regulatory reform. So to understand why this is considered so urgent, we need to look at what happens when post-market surveillance isn't optimal. There have been several major medical device scandals that could have been either prevented or mitigated if a robust post-market surveillance system had been in place. A lot of what I'm going to talk about just highlights the importance of continuously monitoring what's happening with devices, continually analysing adverse event reporting, and making sure that when you have that information, there is actually a system in place to do something with it. So most people will be familiar with the very well publicised device failings of the PIP breast implant scandal and the Johnson & Johnson metal and metal hip replacement. Just to recap, the company PIP used industrial grade silicon instead of medical grade silicon in breast implants. And this led to much higher rupture rates that weren't initially recognised. Over 400,000 women worldwide were affected, and it led to widespread implant removals. And where it wasn't necessarily indicated to remove the implants, there was a lot of anxiety caused by this, and women were very concerned about their health. So in this case, the PMS failures were a lack of robust reporting of the early rupture rates, and poor traceability and follow-up of women who'd had these implants implanted. And lastly, a delayed recognition by regulators and clinicians that there was an issue. If there had been an effective PMS system, it would have been flagged at a much earlier stage that these devices were failing, and regulatory intervention would have happened much quicker, and it would have saved a lot of women a lot of angst. The metal and metal hip implants from Johnson & Johnson, the DePuy division, these released medical particles into the bloodstream, and this caused tissue damage and systemic toxicity. It wasn't necessarily recognised what was happening because there was a lot of nondescript symptoms reported by people who had this hip replacement, and it actually took quite a long time before it was tied down to the cause being this metallosis. A lot of patients had to have revision surgeries, and there were serious long-term health effects for people that had become ill due to this condition. The PMS failure in this case was the early patient complaints and revision surgeries weren't centrally tracked, and when manufacturers and regulators did become aware of this issue, they didn't act quickly enough on the adverse incidents that had been reported. As a result of this, the use of implant registries has been indicated, and systematic tracking and trends have been indicated as being very important to highlight this happening much sooner. There are other less well-known cases that have contributed to the urgency of the statutory instrument, and to name just a few, the transvaginal mesh implants used for pelvic organ prolapse and incontinence had resulted in many women suffering severe pain, erosion and infections. There have been thousands of lawsuits to date, and in the United Kingdom, 3 companies who manufacture this mesh, and there are many others, have actually settled lawsuits with 140 women. So this is going to be a case that's going to be ongoing over a period of time. The PMS failure in this case was that there was weak follow-up reported on the complications, and had there been post-market surveillance studies, this could have assessed the risks in clinical use, and the product could have been withdrawn much sooner, which would have saved a lot of health issues for women. Cardiac defibrillator leads supplied by Medtronics were found to fracture, and when they fractured, this either led to the patient getting inappropriate shocks or actually a failure to deliver life-saving therapy. The failure rate was much higher than expected, and there has been at least 13 deaths that can be attributed to this, and many injuries. The early fracture data was not investigated particularly aggressively, and this resulted in a delay in communicating this to clinicians and to patients. If there had been a more aggressive post-market surveillance review and adverse incidents had been analysed more thoroughly, this could have prompted faster action and lives could have been saved. Finally, the PSUR permanent birth control device caused chronic bleeding and autoimmune symptoms. And in some cases, it led to perforation of fallopian tubes and uterus in some patients. The PMS failure was that symptoms were underreported and there was a lack of clinical follow-up, which delayed recognition of patterns in patients. If there had been long-term follow-up studies and if the adverse incidents had been tracked and analysed, this could have signalled safety concerns much earlier. So in summary, this is only a very small sample of why post-market surveillance is extremely important. There are lots of other examples where post-market surveillance could have helped, and probably cases where it has helped that we just haven't reported on yet. It's important to say it wasn't because there wasn't post-market surveillance here. It was just that there was an inadequate oversight of the post-market surveillance. So had we had a much more robust system, the patient harm could have been minimised, or in some cases it may have been prevented altogether. So as a result of this, the post-market surveillance statutory instrument has been introduced into UK medical device regulations in advance of all other regulations. This just highlights the importance that's been put on the post-market surveillance and why we need to do that as quickly as possible. I won't go into a lot of detail because I'm going to pass over to Damon in a second, but what has been put into this statutory instrument, it updates definitions and it's much more prescriptive as to what manufacturers should do. It improves the clarity of what's being asked. It asks manufacturers to provide much more detail. For example, they have to have a whole PMS system, which will include a post-market surveillance plan that spans the whole lifetime of the device. There's enhanced reporting requirements, and there are clear obligations for manufacturers with respect to field safety corrective actions and field safety notices. At this point, I think I will stop and I will hand over to Damon and Umar to give you a much more in-depth survey of what the post-market surveillance legislation looks like. Just very briefly, Damon is the sales manager for medical devices UK and Ireland with BSI, and Damon manages the BSI commercial and clients navigate the regulatory landscape and achieve certification. He has more than 20 years experience in the medical device industry, and 12 of those being in regulatory, and he has helped hundreds of startups and SMEs gain certification. Umar is the business development manager for North UK and Ireland, and he facilitates the initiation of clients' medical device certification journeys by guiding them through the application and proposal phases. So with that, I will stop sharing and I will hand over to Damon.
Great, thanks Elaine. I'll start sharing. Somebody let me know when the slides are on the screen. Okay. Right, hopefully you can all see the slides.
We can.
Right, fantastic, thank you. Yeah, thanks for the introductions. I won't do them again. Great to be here, but we'll jump straight in. We've got quite a lot to cover. Happy to take questions either as we go through, but ideally at the end, and I'm happy to go back to slides if we need to discuss things in more detail. And yeah, thanks Elaine, great introduction. I think the importance of post-market surveillance was really well covered there. Those issues that you raised with some of those devices, I remember a lot of them well. Most of them happened while I was at BSI, and what came out of that was more robust post-market surveillance and unannounced visits. So anyone who's had an unannounced visit recently, that came about because of those, particularly the PIP scandal. And it, like Elaine said, this has probably saved people's lives. We don't really know because the incidents haven't happened. We've prevented them. But when you look back at some of the incidents that did happen when we didn't have PMS in place at this level we have now, certainly in Europe at least, you know, you can see how it's been a real benefit and undoubtedly has saved lives. Okay, so just before we kind of get into the real detail of what's kind of happening in the UK, I have borrowed a really old slide from when we first had our MDR presentations a few years ago, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Post-market surveillance, what is it? Just a very basic definition that we sort of made right at the beginning of MDR being introduced. So this is what's happening under CE marking. If you've got a CE mark for your products, you're probably familiar with this, but the first thing to say is the big circle, QMS, all of these kind of post-market activities are covered or should be covered under your quality management system. That's how you should operate, use procedures to do these things, and that's how we will measure it, by looking at your quality management system, see that these things are happening and being done effectively. Within the quality management system, you then got post-market surveillance as a catch-all term that covers a few different things. So that's the white circle, and some of the things it would cover would be what we'd call reactive post-market surveillance. So that's things like vigilance, getting information back about what's happening with your devices out on the market, and then more proactive post-market surveillance, for example, post-market clinical follow-up, actually actively going out and seeking feedback on your devices. So there's a kind of reactive and a proactive way of doing post-market surveillance. We'd expect both have their part to play. And then alongside that, there's some kind of reporting requirements at top right of your screen, PSUR, so that's the periodic safety update report. It's a mechanism for reporting what's happening each year. And the SSCP, which is the summary of safety and clinical performance, again, information that's available to anyone on UDMED normally to see, is a device safe and what should they know about it. And this applies to all devices under every different route of conformity. And this is the kind of so this is what happened when MDR was brought in. Obviously, in the UK at the moment, we are not. We're running, UK CA, not MDR. So whilst we will accept CE marking in the UK, if you have a UK CA certificate, you're not operating to the same level as they are in Europe at the moment, particularly when it comes to post-market surveillance. So that's why there's been a kind of need to address the situation in the UK for safety reasons, and to really identify one of these areas that we do need to address quite urgently. So the MHRA, we're obviously very aware of this, and they sought to introduce regulatory reform pretty much after we did Brexit, so that we could sort of address the UK issues that left behind, if you like. So there was an initial public consultation, and there were still people talking about it now, because obviously UKCA is still being discussed as how it might look in the future. But the thing that was kind of identified was that the post-market surveillance regulations is one of the first things that we could do to really strengthen the regulatory requirements and ultimately improve patient safety in Great Britain, and that's what it's all about. So box 4, it does apply to all devices placed on the GB market or put into service, regardless of whether you do it through a CE mark or a UKCA mark. Both of those are valid ways to enter the UK market. Whichever one you choose, you will have to apply the GB regulations now for post-market surveillance alongside anything you're doing in Europe. But it does, our post-market surveillance that's being proposed in the UK, or has been kind of launched now, broadly mirrors the EU MDR post-market surveillance requirements. There's not much difference, but we'll talk about that as we go through. So that's the introduction. That's kind of where we are right now. It's kind of brought us up to speed. We did a sort of quick update, post the election last year, the new government come in and changed anything, not particularly, but what they have done is recognised again this need to bring post-market surveillance forward. So if anything, they've just actually, improved the timeline for bringing in post-market surveillance as a kind of obvious measure to improve the safety in the UK, and also they put in measures for higher risk devices that will have additional post-market surveillance requirements. They also have discussed, future enhancements and free market regulations as well, but that's a topic for another day. So definitely still happening. In fact, if anything, the importance has gone up in the last year or so. So that kind of brings us up to where are we now? So the new roadmap for the UK was published in December 2024. So a nice little project chart here for people who like these sort of things. But the one we're interested in is the first box, number 1, new regulations for post-market surveillance. So the statutory instrument was debated and made law just at the end of last year into this year. The publication of the first iteration was done earlier in the year, and essentially there was 6 months then for the regulations to come into force. and the publication of the final guidance. So we are now in at the end of June launch. It happened June the 16th. So it's now a requirement. So yeah, we are, there's nothing left now on this project plan. It's just become the way forward. So we've kind of reached the end of the project. And now it applies to all manufacturers placing product on the market in the UK. So what is it? So as we said, it's to add to the regulations that we already have in the UK. The way we do that is through a statutory instrument. So it's a bit of extra legislation essentially, and it's a statutory instrument SI 2024/1368. And it's got some really funky paragraph headings, if you like. So the first bit, the interpretation, 44ZC is the designation for that bit of the legislation. So part 4AA is PMS, post-market surveillance, and it's just got a list, if you go and look at it, of all the different things. So the interpretations, how is it defined, what's the scope of PMS, what should your system look like, what should your PMS plan look like, what are preventative and corrective actions, what kind of reporting and investigation of serious incidents should you be doing, FSCA, which is field safety corrective actions, and notices. If things are happening with your products outside of Great Britain, what requirement do you have to publish or to communicate that in the UK? Your post-market surveillance report, so there's an example of what that should look like. Your periodic safety update report, again, some guidance on that. Also trend reporting, so at a lower level, if you're noticing more recalls with your trend reporting, at what level do you need to then actually do something about that, and what's your system in place for that? There are some analysis of reports that the Secretary of State for the UK will want or maybe ask for. And again, there's some requirements around the retention of your documentation. How long do you need to keep your PMS documentation, and whether when and how can the government request these? So for those of you who've got a CE mark on your products and have been selling your products in Europe or the UK with that CE mark, then a lot of this will be very familiar. It's very similar to what's in place in Europe, just with different designations and paragraph headings. I guess the one main difference in the UK is that because we're still operating essentially under our old directive that was in place in UK law when we left Europe, it also includes the MDR and IVDR requirements together in one document. In CE marking now, MDR and IVDR, they've separated out the IVD requirements, but in the UK they're still covered. So the structure in the UK is slightly different because we still include in vitro diagnostics, but other than that, not much difference, and the PMS regulations apply pretty much in the same way to IVDs and regular medical devices. But again, just to re-emphasize the point, these requirements in the UK apply even if you don't have UKCA. If you've just got a CE mark and you're using that to access the UK market, you'll still have to take into account the specific UK post-market surveillance requirements, even though they're very similar to the ones in Europe. We'll explain as we go through how we kind of go about that, and how BSI would deal with those sort of differences or two systems. There are a couple of, I guess, exemptions, as there always is. So custom-made devices are exempt from certain elements of post-market surveillance. So the field safety corrective actions, the report, the periodic safety update report, and trend reporting. If you have custom-made devices in the UK, you won't need to do these. Custom-made devices obviously made specifically for each patient, so they are treated slightly differently than regular medical devices. And then there is a complete exemption, so you don't need to do the new UK PMS kind of rules at all if you are making devices for clinical investigation, or devices for performance evaluation, or a device that is subject to an exceptional use authorization. So yeah, some exemptions, but just obviously make sure you check if you're not sure. But there is some guidance that was published by the MHRA on the 15th of January just to explain what's exempt, why, when and how. So yeah, the MHRA do a pretty good job normally of publishing their guidance, and it's worth checking out. Okay, so who's responsible? Who does what, when, how? So as a manufacturer, I hope we've got a few on the call. You've got the most to do, not surprisingly. and I know it can be difficult sometimes to work out who does what, but you obviously get the bulk of it. It's your product. You're the one actually doing the selling and the regulation of your product. So, you know, you're going to have to put in place your post-market surveillance system and your plan. You're going to have CAPA, so incident reporting, field safety corrective actions. You must also have a way, you know, to produce your periodic report. So you have to have something in place to allow you to do your periodic safety reports and any other activities that come out of that. You have to retain your PMS documentation. You have to report serious incidents within a specific timeline, and they will potentially be investigated by the MHRA. And obviously, you've got to stay on top of trend reporting. So there's quite a few things that a manufacturer has to put in place and then implement effectively to meet the requirements in the UK. As we said previously, if you've done this under a CE mark, then a lot of it will just be already in place. So you just got to make sure it all kind of lines up. But yeah, if you're new to it, if you just got UKCA, this is what you need to do from now on. And if you have a UK responsible person, so that's generally companies outside of the UK selling in the UK, they have to have a UK responsible person. So if you're dealing with any sort of suppliers or companies based in Ireland, for example, you know, who are selling into the UK, they need to have a UK responsible person. And those people will have certain responsibilities as well. So that's receiving some of the update reports. They also have to retain the documentation, and again, potentially they'll cooperate with the MHRA as needed, acting as sort of on behalf of the company that's outside of the UK. And then the approved body, it's not just BSI, there are others, but in this case, BSI, what do we do? So we will check that you're compliant, and we will do that mainly through our surveillance audits of your quality management system. We will also assess your post-market surveillance plans when you initially apply to BSI. So if you make an application to us, we want to see your post-market surveillance plans and then check through surveillance that you're actually implementing them. We'll review any of your CAPA notifications, corrective action plans. We will review your periodic safety update reports. So when you issue those, we will review them and comment on them if we need to. And again, we will provide information to the MHRA upon requests. You know, if they need, they can come to you, but they can also come to us as the notified body. And then finally, the last sort of group of people who are kind of involved in the process is the MHRA themselves, who manage the whole thing. So for the MHRA, they will look at receiving and investigating serious incidents and looking at field safety corrective actions. They will investigate separate investigations where needed. So particularly if there's obviously products that are causing serious harm. They will also want to look and identify trends, patterns, signals, so they can aggregate obviously lots of information from different manufacturers. What often happens is if a manufacturer of a certain type of device flags up some issues they're having with the MHRA, they may well contact manufacturers of similar devices who haven't had issues, but they will want to extend that kind of investigation to similar products just to see if it's a generic thing or whether it's specific to one product range or one company's products. So they take obviously a wider view of this. And they'll also get reports from other sources, healthcare professionals, members of the public, you know, making complaints and so on. So everybody's got a lot to do. Hopefully this helps a little bit to explain, you know, as a manufacturer, you focus on your elements. As an approved body, BSI will focus on the bits that we need to do, which is essentially oversight of the manufacturers, and the MHRA will manage the whole thing. So a lot to do. But again, a lot of these will already be in place. They're all good common sense things, and they're all aimed at obviously patient safety and often improving the products as well and the performance of the products as a kind of additional benefit. So let's look at some of the new requirements that have come in the last week or two, I guess, and whenever the 15th was. So the first one is preventative and corrective actions taken in a timely manner. This is hugely important. Going back to those issues we mentioned right at the beginning with the products that kind of failed and caused death and serious injury to people, a preventative corrective action taken quickly would have solved a lot of those things. They could have withdrawn the products much earlier. or told people to kind of come and check things. So this is one of the really crucial things for patient safety, is to very quickly and effectively identify problems and deal with them and have corrective actions in place, and then notify all the relevant people that this is what's happening. So we will look at your, system and process for doing this will be a big part of our audits when we look at them. So yeah, there's guidance again. I think it's 44 ZG is the paragraph about who you need to notify, what processes and procedures that you need to have in place. Now, one of the mechanisms for being able to communicate these can be through your periodic safety update reports. That is a suitable mechanism because that goes to the approved body and to the MHRA. That's a way of reporting some of this, but equally there are some, well, as we move on to serious incidents, that actually you need to report those, not on an annual basis, but as they happen within an agreed timescale. So there is a definition of what is, what is a serious incident compared to just a regular sort of corrective action. That's in the statutory instrument. It will explain what a serious incident is, but it's pretty much aligned to the definitions in EU MDR or IBDR. So it's a similar definition of a serious incident. But there's some legal text about what you need to do if you have a serious incident and how quickly you need to report it to the MHRA. And obviously that's something we will check. So yeah, depending on the level of seriousness, it's 2 days, 10 days or 15 days that you have to report this, so that it doesn't give you much time. If you have a serious incident, you need to deal with it immediately and report it to the relevant people. And then PMSR and PSUR, so the post-market surveillance report and the periodic safety update report, which is a real test of my acronyms today, is risk class dependent. We'll look at that in a second, a bit later, but lower risk devices will have less kind of to do in these reports, but still needed. But the higher risk devices will be a bit more information would be needed. But the PMSR should basically summarize the results and conclusions and analysis of data collected under your post-market surveillance plan. So it's a summary of all the things you've done in a year to capture information. It should describe any corrective actions you've taken and why you did them. And the only slight difference from the EU requirements is that the post-market surveillance report must be updated every 3 years by the manufacturer. The periodic safety update report, PSUR, is required for all devices, but we'll look at it more closely later about when it's needed and how often. And then the final one, trend reporting. So again, trend reporting is a very sort of low-level way to pick up some things that might be happening before they become too serious. So again, that's a requirement under post-market surveillance in the UK. And, it's really looking at incidents increasing in severity or frequency. So you have one product that fails in a minor way, fine, but if it keeps happening or gets more frequent, then obviously that should be picked up in trend reporting. Or if the incidents are not increasing in number but in seriousness, then again that should be picked up in trend reporting. This is a little bit different to MDR, but again it's covered in the guidance issued by the UKCA. So all of these different things for calculating the significance, should be in your plan. You have to demonstrate as a manufacturer you have an understanding of these things and procedures to be able to implement them and effectively manage these different reports, different requirements, and different levels of response to different kinds of incidents that you come across. So do some research if you haven't already, because these things are now UK regulations. So we'll put the timelines for implementation. We'll hop through them. End of December 2024, the regulation was passed into law and we began the impact assessment. Right now, this slide was done about 2 months ago. So now 2 months ago, the impact assessment was concluded. There were updates made to the quality management systems, and we asked people started to create specific post-market surveillance plans. 16th of June, the regulation comes into force, so that's now happened. Compliance is required, and you need to implement your post-market surveillance plan, and your serious incident reporting, which should align with EU, needs to start right now if it hasn't already, and also your trend reporting. So all these things should have been put into, should have been implemented already. in reality, in terms of interacting with your approved body, we will start to, review your post-market surveillance report and your periodic safety update report, typically in a year's time. So, we don't review them now, we wait a year and then we'll review them. So really a year from now is when you'll first get these things reviewed by your notified body. But if you're having surveillance audits for your quality management system between now and then, we will also be looking to see if you've implemented these procedures. So in terms of the QMS and again, post-market surveillance requirements, essentially it's the same in UKCA as it is for CE directives. Your post-market surveillance system, should be based on your post-market surveillance plan, and there should be evidence of procedures that you cover the requirements of post-market surveillance. In the UK, that's 44ZE is the paragraph you need to cover. And then also specifically for UKCA, slightly different, is the evidence that your post-market surveillance system outputs feeds into the technical and clinical documentation of the device. So again, it's described in 44ZE, but essentially, if there are things that come out of your post-market surveillance activities, some of those need to feed into your technical and or clinical documentation, because it's going to affect future designs of the product potentially, or other things that you might want to take into account that we will want to see added to your technical documentation. Okay, so we talked about the periodic safety update report. This is the main way that on a periodic basis that you will report what's happened each year to your approved body, so we can review it and record it and share it as needed with other bodies. So it's risk-based, so the higher risk devices at the top. So for class 3 devices, active implantable devices, or class 2B implantable devices, so essentially the highest risk devices, there will need to be an annual PSUR done. If it's class 2A, lower classification, then maybe it's every 2 years, biennial. For class 2B non-implantable, it's annual, and for class 2A non-implantable, it's biennial. So essentially 2A is non-implantable, implantable every 2 years. Everything else that's higher than that would be every year. Now, we will, does this need to be reviewed by an approved body? Only if we've done a UK conformity assessment, in which case, we might do then standalone reviews of your PSURs, specifically for your UKCA certification. So you still have to do these things. But in terms of the approved body and what we do, if we haven't done a UK conformity assessment, then you're presumably placing your product under the market using a CE certificate, where of course we will have looked at those things anyway through your CE marking activities. So this is just saying, when does a UKCA specific review need to happen? And the final column just explains, is it the same review as the EU MDR review? And in most cases it is, apart from class 2A implantable, which we are treating slightly differently in the UK. And there's just, again, there's a definition in that, in the guidance document about how it's different, but it's just really talking about the cycle more than anything else. So yeah, so we will carry out more detailed reviews if we think we need to, but most of the time it will be covered by your CE marking, your safety update report that we get to look at anyway. Obviously, if you only have a UKCA mark and you don't have CE yet, then obviously these will all be done under your UKCA designation, so they will all apply. I can't see any people on the screen, so if there's any questions, somebody shout out, but for now I'll keep going. Okay, so just a very quick slide on IVDs. As we said, in the UK, they're kind of merged in with medical devices. In Europe, they're separate. So if there are any IVD companies on the call, then again, you've got the same kind of risk-based classification as to how long, but most of them seem to be done annually anyway. So but it's just a bit of guidance there. We have a separate IVD team, so we can forward any questions on that. It's not my particular area. Okay, so then we've got periodic safety update report. If you've got a UK certified device and you need to do this for the first time, so you've not got a CE mark device, so you're putting this together now as a new activity. There is some good guidance from the MHRA. So follow the MHRA's standardised format. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. Follow the format that they've suggested. It's in the statutory instrument. They've included some data tables, but they're just suggestions. You can obviously determine for your company and your products what is the most appropriate data to kind of use, and it should be issued either every year or every 2 years, depending on what type of device it is. And for anything placed on the market from now on, that's what should happen. And you should submit it directly to your approved body, and we will review it. We will save it on our portal, and if needed, we will share it with the MHRA. So if you have a CE mark and a UKCA mark for your products, so you have effectively two very similar periodic safety update reports, or one update report that you want to apply essentially to both of the legislations, that's fine. We can review it as one review. We just need you to do a few things. So upload your report to the portal, make sure it meets the requirements of both regulations, and really just to help us identify the certificate numbers to which it relates, whether it's MDR, IVDR, or UKCA, so we know which bits we're looking at, and then use your PSUR cover page to state which regulations, which devices, which data collection period is covered by the document. So we've got that summarized on the front page, and then to help us, because it'll take longer to review, and so therefore to help you as well, please present the data in a clear and structured manner, with the GB data sets alongside any EU or worldwide data as required, and address the specific GB content requirements, make sure they're covered separately so we can ensure we can find those bits quickly. So I realize we're getting a bit short on time, so I'll go through quite quickly. I think each of you, if you haven't done this already, you need to have a little bit of an impact assessment on what this is going to mean for your business. So first of all, your devices, how many have you got, what risk classification, how long are they going to be on the market, which certifications have you got or intend to get, whether it's CE, MDR, whether it's the directives, or whether it's UKCA. You may still have products on the market under the old directives, in which case at some point MDR or UKCA will probably take over from that. Geography, where are you going to sell these devices, where are you placing them on the market, your quality management system, have you got your post-market surveillance in place for each device, any gap analysis that you need to do for your quality system, and then obviously set up your systems, procedures, the documents, the reports that you need to write. So hopefully you've done this and prepared. If not, now's probably a good time to start looking at what you need to do. And then the final slide, just the key takeaway messages. So yes, number one, post-market surveillance regulation applies to the Great Britain market. MDR obviously applies in Northern Ireland still for now. The regulation started on the 16th of June. It applies to all devices placed on the market in the UK, whether it's through UKCA or CE. There are new requirements for timelines to report serious incidents, trend reporting, and your surveillance reports. And we will be looking to confirm that manufacturers have updated their quality management systems to address these requirements when we do your next surveillance audit. And obviously we will raise non-conformities if we find that these things have not been implemented. Okay, so that's it. Thank you. I'll put a link here when we share the slides. It's just we've done a webinar. If you want to watch the webinar, it's where I got most of my information from, the slides, but it goes into a bit more detail of what I've been talking about. So I'm going to end the slideshow and stop sharing. Okay, and I'm happy if we've got any time left to take any questions there might be.
Is there any questions from the people online? If not, I'll ask a question, Damon, if you don't mind.
That's fine. Yeah.
So for manufacturers that have a CE certificate, I guess just now there's it's not possible to upload it to Udemy, but once Udemy is functional, will they still report their PSUR through the notified body or the approved body, or do you see that changing?
I think ultimately, so some things will go straight into Udemy, but others still need to be looked at by the notified body. But yeah, I mean, the plan is to put everything into Udemy ultimately. But some of them, yeah, we do need to review the periodic safety update report, for example. We do need to, the notified body want to review that and record it as well. It's relevant to us as well. But yeah. So, but obviously we're all waiting for UDMED. It's been long promised, as yet undelivered. Not fully implemented, let's say. Okay, well, obviously it's all made sense, which is great, and it's not my presentation, so I'll thank my cleverer colleagues who put the presentation together. Or the questions will come as you start to think about it, or you're running off now, having internal discussions and working out what you need to do. We are more than happy to have. We can't consult, obviously, but Umar, I'm sure, is happy to have conversations with anyone who's on the call. If you just want to check what you need to do or any further information you might want, we can point you in the direction of links, documents, webinars that we've run. As with all these things, the obligation is on manufacturers to kind of understand these things and implement them.
Fiona, I think there's a couple of questions in the Q&A.
Yeah. So have you got any take-home advice for medical equipment management departments? There's a number of people from different parts of NHS. I noticed here kind of how this is going to affect them.
Okay, so if I understand, these are the one departments that repair it within the hospitals typically, and occasionally put on products onto the market through the hospitals, or at least share them through the hospitals. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah,
I mean,
my understanding. Yeah,
they might be the first port of call if something doesn't work or something.
Yeah,
they may see things coming
yeah,
through.
no, it's a good point.
Well.
So I don't think, I mean, unless I've missed something, I don't think they're obviously called out in the legislation, especially as people who have responsibilities in that sense. But equally, you can see how they have an important role to play to feed that back to the manufacturers who do have the responsibility to report these things. So I'm not sure whether we, would we, as an approved body, is that one of the ways they can manufacturers can interact, with the hospital departments to make sure that that's a great place to get your first bit of feedback, like you say, or your first, I guess early warning of devices that are not working properly, I would say. But I don't think so. I don't think there's any obligations on the department, but obviously they will have an important role to play in identifying these issues, I guess.
Yeah, and I think somebody wants. I don't know how I'm able to. Duncan Ferguson, who I think maybe has an answer or comment to make. I'm not sure if I can make you. If I can change whether you can actually. I can allow your mic, I think.
Yeah.
There are some medical physics equipment management groups that do limited manufacturing.
Okay. Yeah.
And in which case, especially because of the new regulations, even when it's only internal, they do need to have the same quality systems and so on and so forth to allow them to do that. It's becoming fewer and further between, but it should be recognised.
Yeah, I'm aware of a few departments that have obviously got CE marks for products that they, into service, I would say, more than on the market, because like you say, often it's just within the hospital or the trust that they're supplying these products, but sometimes beyond that as well.
They occasionally have partnerships with neighbouring health boards to do a certain amount of this. I think Robin's wanting to come in because I think he's definitely got experience of this in the past.
Bear with me. I'm going to try and hold on a second. I'm not seeing the full list. Hold on, Robin. You're too far down the list.
Oh yeah,
can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. So just following up on what Duncan said, there are some teams manufacturing devices for use in hospitals, but generally that's exempt from the regulations. But there are several groups, sort of labs, producing custom-made devices.
Okay.
And I think the kind of understanding from the MHRA is that if it's a custom-made device, even if it's for use in your own hospital, it should be like registered with the MHRA and treated as a custom-made device in accordance with the regulations. So the changes that you've described, some of them, or I guess all of them that relate to custom-made devices would be applicable.
Yeah, so there was obviously that exemption for custom-made devices at the moment, that you don't have to do all of the PMS activities, but some of them. So yeah, custom-made devices obviously are quite tricky, because what we normally, when we're looking at medical devices, we're looking at consistency. Every device that you send out of the factory should be perfect and match, should be the perfect version of the product and consistent and reliable. But if you're making a device new each time, or a custom-made device, that consistency is hard to achieve, because every device is different. So they've always been, I guess, treated slightly differently. And under the old directive, were just excluded completely. It's only under the new regulation in Europe that they've actually, for the first time, kind of brought custom-made devices under the regulation. So yeah, if you're in a hospital department and you've got, you're either putting devices into service outside of your hospital, then yes, some of these regulations will apply to you in the same way they would do to any manufacturer.
Okay, thanks.
There was a follow-on question in relation to how, what's the responsibilities on healthcare professionals, because I know that there are some surgeons and doctors in the audience as well. Are you going to say something similar?
I mean, it's very similar. They're not called out as having an obligation, but equally have a huge role to play in patient safety, because they're, again, potentially people who will first notice some of these issues. So I don't know if there are separate, I guess, ethical things that doctors need to do, or surgeons if they have issues with products, I'm sure. But yeah, as soon as that information is relayed to the manufacturer, then the rest of the all those other procedures kick in then. So
I think it's likely that there will be processes and procedures in each health board.
I would assume
so I think it's very much defer to your
but they're not called out specifically in this regulation.
And there was one other question, which was and after this, I think we'll have to make this the last one. We don't. Somebody asking was, if they only manufacture a Class 1 device, does that mean that they don't need to produce a PSUR?
Correct, I believe. Yeah, because it's from the list of PSURs, it starts at 2A and goes upwards. So there are still some obligations for manufacturers of Class 1 devices, but not the periodic safety update report, because that's generally at a higher level.
Okay, I think that's. I'll maybe hand back to Elaine. Thanks very much for your questions, and I'll maybe leave Elaine to close out the session.
Okay, I'm going to. There's just one last quick question that came in, Damon, if you don't mind.
Of course.
It's from Rebecca, and she says, "What about third-party companies that wish to provide the services on behalf of the NHS? Does this then remove the need for them as now regulated?"
Okay, so I mean, as a general, reply. So third party, ultimately, the regulations, we have the concept of legal manufacturer, who actually owns the product and is placing it on the market under their name. Whether somebody else manufactures it or designs it is irrelevant. Who's actually owning the product? Who's the legal manufacturer? So it's the natural person who places the product under the market under their own name. That's who the regulations apply to. So if you're a third party that's supplying a product, but somebody else is taking it and then putting it onto the market in their name under their own certification, then the requirements, the regulations apply to that other company. But if you're sort of supplying a product into the NHS and it's under your certification, then the rules apply to you. So it's the legal manufacturer concept. It's one of the first things mentioned in the medical device regulations, is the definition of a legal manufacturer. Yeah. So again, as a supplier, or if you operate as a third-party supplier or services, provide services to the manufacturers or to the certificate holders, you're part of the process, but you're not the ones who are responsible for the reporting. But you may obviously get involved in incident reporting and providing information and so on, or helping put together the post-market, surveillance activities. So involved in the process, yes, but only this kind of requirement is for the legal manufacturer of the devices.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'd just like to extend my thanks to you, Damon, and to Umar. That was really very informative. As I think was put into the chat, the recording will be made available and the link will be emailed out to all of the participants. We will be taking a break from our webinar series for the summer, but our next one will be in September, and Frances Ramsey is going to lead that, and she'll be joined by David Beattie, who's the Innovation Programme Manager for National Services Scotland, and the webinar will be around the procurement process and how innovation fits with the current pathway. So thank you very much for everyone who joined, and thank you very much to Damon and Umar.
Thanks, Elaine. Really enjoyed it, and please reach out to us if anyone's got any further questions.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Bye.